With the Montreal International Game Summit, MIGS, just around the corner, one of Canada's most important gaming conferences, it's the perfect time to talk about why local events matter and who's helping make them happen. Jason Lepine is the founder and CEO of XP Gaming, the organization behind MIGS and the driving force in building Canada's gaming ecosystem. Through XP Gaming, Jason has worked to connect studios, vendors, communities, creating spaces where new ideas and talent can flourish. His journey reflects on a core belief. Local events aren't just networking opportunities, they're growth engines for the entire industry. Jason, thank you so much for joining me. I know you have a busy weekend coming up, but how are you?
I'm doing great, Greg, and I really appreciate the invite. So thanks for bringing me onto your podcast.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you. You have a really cool background, starting all the way at TELUS, which I love the how you make this transition. But now you're helping put on conferences in Canada, and I think that's just so cool how you're becoming this connector of people in Canada, and that's awesome. I've been seeing a lot of talk online about MIGS coming up. I know a lot of people I've met are excited to go check it out. It seems like it's been growing year over year for the past few years. What makes MIGS special to you?
Absolutely. So, for those who aren't familiar, MIGS stands for the Montreal International Game Summit. And it's an event, a conference, video game conference that's been happening in Montreal for over 20 years. And my company has taken over the production of the event as of 2023. So this is going to be our third year producing the event. So it has a very long history. It probably means a lot of different things to different folks who've attended. And for me, it is the biggest event and the most impactful event my company has the opportunity to produce. So when we took over in 2023, we changed the identity of MIGS, bringing it back to a focus of business deals first. At the time, prior to us getting involved, the event was actually under a different name. It was called Mega MIGS, and it was a lot of things at once. It was a part consumer, part business. And when we stepped in, what we were good at was connecting people for deals in business. So we pretty much focused the event, and that's what we've been building over the last 2 years. And this year specifically, we're able to bring back the conference portion of MIGS. So when MIGS started over 20 years ago, it was almost a very similar kind of start to GDC, where it was developers coming together to share knowledge and to have a bit of this community being built in Montreal, which Montreal is or has been one of the major game development hubs globally. So um, kind of what happened at GDC and in San Francisco, same thing happened in Montreal, turned into MIGS. And that's why it's very exciting this year that we can actually bring the talks back, the game development talks back to MIGS across 4 stages. So while last year we had one stage that only focused on business talks, this year we have game development talks, we have an audio track, we have business, of course, talking about how to publish your game, how to market your game, all of that, making this clearly the most ambitious MIGS we've ever produced, but also bringing it back to its roots in a way that the community has asked for.
You said a lot there. This is all digestible, right? And I love it because I'm looking at all my next questions, and you kind of hit on a piece of all that. So I'm trying to determine how do I tell this story? What makes the most sense? And what I
Mhm.
love is that you're making it kind of those business meetings first, right? We've seen a lot of conferences that are bleeding into the community and players, and which is great. We want conferences like that, but there's also needs to be stuff where business can get done, right? Gaming is a business. It's about meeting people, especially these days. Connections make a difference. And I think it's very important, especially we don't have much on the East Coast here, right? And Montreal falls to that, right? We can come, I'm in Jersey, right? It's an easy trip up there. And in Montreal itself, I think you have Ubisoft, you have Unity, you have a lot of those big studios there. So you are a giant hub, and it's really cool. Before we jump too much into MIGS, can you tell me why, in your mind, Jason, or why we should all understand what makes local events really matter, right? We always hear about games coming, we always hear about GDC, but it's these lesser events which I think are important. So why are they so different and why do they matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can only answer from my point of view. And I can say they're important because they give that connectivity and that sense of belonging to people. And there is no one size fits all event. That's why you even see GDC next year. They're turning their whole branding around the Festival of Gaming, recognizing that GDC is no longer just kind of one show. It's a series of micro events all across San Francisco. So my own story was I was an engineer at TELUS, a telecommunication company in Canada, and I really wanted to get into something I was passionate about. And when I was trying to figure out what that was, I was in my late 20s. I was like, well, I've always loved video games my whole life. Can I get into video games in Canada? And I'm based in Toronto. So at the time, I didn't even know video games were made in Toronto or in Canada, much less. I thought they were all made in California or Japan. That was my mind of where video games are made. And so I was searching for jobs. There's Ubisoft Toronto, which is the biggest hub in Toronto, and that's where I was applying. And I didn't know about anything else. In hindsight, if my current self could go to my past self and tell him that, hey, there are roughly 300 game studios in Ontario alone, I think I'd have my mind blown at the time. So all that to say, just because locally there weren't any events I could find, it was hard for me to understand what is the gaming industry in my region and how do I get involved. So what I ended up doing was actually I was looking for communities, and I found one through Meetup. It was a fan group that just a bunch of Nintendo fans coming together. Um, I'm going on a large tangent here about my start into the gaming industry to answer your question of why their local events are important. So stop me if I go too far.
No, I love it. You're connecting all these dots. Keep on rolling.
All right. So I went to this Nintendo fan event, and there I met the organizer who was looking to build a fan event in Toronto. And I'm like, I'm down with that. I want to build a PAX in Canada. Basically, we didn't have one. Long story short, we actually went on to build the largest video game expo with this guy I met through a company he founded called Enthusiast Gaming. It was called EGLX. There was over 30,000 people. That event was around until about 2019, 2020. It was unfortunately went away with the pandemic. And through that event, this is where I discovered this rich ecosystem of not just gaming fans, but game developers were coming together to meet at a fan show. And I could see that their needs weren't being met. They wanted to connect and share knowledge and learn with other developers and trade notes and meet investors. I'm like, a fan event isn't really catered for that. And so I actually built a pilot conference on top of EGLX in 2018, and we limited it to 300 tickets, and we sold out. So all tickets were sold, and I was like, "There's something here. Like people want this." And at the time that I did this, there was only one show in all of Canada that I knew of, which was MIGS in Montreal. And I said, well, not everyone, just like not everyone can go to GDC, not everyone can go to Montreal. So I left that company to build XP Gaming and to launch a conference for Toronto. At the time, it was called the XP Game Developer Summit, which has been rebranded to XP Game Summit. Um, Pandemic delayed a lot of things, but we finally launched the in-person event in 2022, and we built a community. And now XP Game Summit is the second largest video game conference in Canada. And the most rewarding thing, if I wanted to be, if I wanted to make a lot of money, there's a lot of other jobs and companies and business models I could probably pursue to pursue that. But the most rewarding thing here is definitely not money. But what I see at all the conferences I host and organize and even attend is people connecting and smiling and hugging each other and making new friendships. And this is a work environment. Like, this isn't just a party, but there's this genuine love because the video game industry runs on passion. Like, most people who work in it are in it because they love the art form, they love video games, they love the challenges that it brings. And so all of that passion just coalesces in these events. And as we've gone on from that event, XP Game Summit in Toronto, we've gone on to do four now in Canada. We've got one on the East Coast in Prince Edward Island, the smallest province in Canada, where people are saying, why are you doing a conference there? 200 people showed up for the first one. We do one in Vancouver. And, I have this very kind of Canadian identity right now, but our goals are very ambitious. We don't want to just stop at Canada. We want to help make these connections all over the world, wherever there's need, as connectivity has no borders. That's actually a really nice tagline. So to go back to your question, to tie it all back to your original question, why is it so important? It's that sense of belonging, more so than ever after the pandemic, where a lot of people in this industry don't go to an office, especially if you're an indie studio. You're probably working remotely. You're checking in with your colleagues maybe once a day, twice a day, on whether it's Slack, Discord, on Google, or whatever platform you use. And when people can come under like one roof and really connect over that hobby and trade notes. That's where magic happens. The creativity, the spark, the sense of belonging, the identity. Like, all I have 4 events in Canada, and their identity is very different because it's the people that make the conference. And that's been fascinating. So yeah, that's why it's important. It's really giving that sense, the sense of belonging, the identity, and the resources for these ecosystems to grow and thrive.
That's so cool. Just the way you broke that whole thing down. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the one of the key words you said there was community. You build a community. When you're a gaming studio, what do you want to do? You want to build a community of gamers. You're also, when you're by yourself as an indie developer, what helps you? Is a community helps push you forward. Other artists, other musicians, other people. Like, everyone dreams and aspires of going to a GDC or a Gamescom because they're huge, but then you're just lost in a sea of people. But you know what's great at these conferences? You still see those 7 or 8 or 9 or 20 people that you know. And like you said, Jason, you go and you hug them and you're excited. But when you're in your smaller market, and it's not a small market by means, you see them more often and you build that community and you build those relationships. And it's just so cool. And you dropped a lot there, right? So I'm going to back up to something you said more in the beginning. Is like, you were at TELUS, and I want to like understand what your role at TELUS was, and then when you started building XP Gaming, and like you decided to build that first summit in Toronto, like what skills did you have to teach yourself that you didn't know at TELUS? Like, that's a huge. I'm imagining there's a very big skills gap between what you did at one place and then the other, or maybe not.
Yes, and there's still gaps I'm closing as a founder of a company, and so I don't know how many of your listeners are indie developers or founders, but they also need to wear a lot of hats. They need to run a company. They need to run the finances. They need to run the marketing, the engineer, whatever it is. So my skill set at TELUS, I was an engineer. I was an electrical engineer, specialized in communications, and my day to day job was to monitor the health of the cellular network across Canada and make capacity adjustments. And it was an interesting time because it's a time, I don't know if you know much about telecom, but it's when let's call it smartphones, where adoption was growing. So everybody was getting smartphones. There was more demand for data, and the old networks were not designed for that. They were designed to take phone calls, and a phone call is takes a lot less resources than millions of data packets from millions of smartphones. So my job was to monitor how much capacity was left in the radio towers and make 2 to 3 year forecasts of, okay, we need to invest here because the performance of this site's going to go, really, it's going to go down, and people are going to notice and probably will leave the company or move to another company. And I did that for almost 10 years. And then I would say, the biggest jump was when I went from TELUS to Enthusiast Gaming, which was the first startup I was a part of, and I was there for 3 years full time. There I was operations manager, so I got a lot of experience leading team, building processes, um, and really just kind of, it was Wild West. I could kind of do anything, for better or for worse. So yeah, not a I'd say the only skill that really translated is my data analysis skill. So one of the things that's kind of unique to events and that's very stressful is ticket sales. So your ticket sales for any event is going to hockey stick if you have a graph. You don't see most of your ticket sales happen until the last, let's call it, 4 weeks before the event, and more so the last 2 weeks before an event. So if you don't have any experience running an event, you're going to invest tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars with the expectation that you're going to make tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of sponsorship and ticket sales. And once your sponsorship cycle's done, it's all running on your ticket sales. And sometimes the gap is huge. And if you're not ready to weather kind of that emotional roller coaster that, hey, your revenue is going to shoot up in the last few weeks before the event, it can really mess with your mind. So I've used some of my models to model that. Now that I've done so many events, I can actually predict the trend um, of my events and my ticket sales. And as an anxious person, it helps me lower my anxiety because I pretty much say, oh yeah, this is normal. Like, it's looking like it's following the model, and I could expect maybe it's 5 ticket sales tomorrow, but in 7 days I know it's going to be 50, and then the day after that will be 100, and then I just watch that, and I've done it so many times now that I feel more comfortable in that zone, even though, it's always a little scary because you never know.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard from more than one founder that data analysis, data modeling has been crucial in what they've done. And some of them are game designers. And here you're a founder of a conference and community, right? Like, it's funny how data modeling can really help you build a structure for understanding how this works. And I can only imagine. I mean, we're about 2 weeks out from MIGS now, right? So one of the things I was going to ask you is what's keeping you up at night. So I don't know if that's what still keeps you up at night, or because you have it so far kind of understood how the process works, if you're kind of cool with it now.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, a show like MIGS that's about 2.5 weeks out for me personally has been almost entirely handed off to production. So I am not very involved at that point. It's all production, locking in the floor plans, the schedules, the vendors, making sure everything flows well. So my role for the next few weeks in relation to that show is pretty much just polishing off the little issues that might crop up, or the fine tunements of the show. But pretty much the show is packaged and ready to go, and there's not much I can do to influence it at this stage. My mind is already in 2026, so we're recording this at the end of October 2025. um, and I've already got my shows for April, May, June locked in, and I'm trying to get my fall of next year lined up of what am I doing in the fall, so that I can go to my partners in November and pretty much next week and say, this is our roadmap for 2026. What makes sense for you? Because all of our partners are building their 2026 budgets right now. Now is the time I need to engage with them so that they can earmark budget for our events and that we can start planning ahead for what we want to do together. So yeah, I'm already, past MIGS in some senses. And what's keeping me awake is more so 2026. What am I doing? Who's going? Which partners are returning? Which new partners are we going for? What are we doing again? What are we canceling? What are we starting up? Like all of that, and it's almost like a blank canvas every time.
How do you plan for something so far in the future, right? You talked about the tracks that you have going on at MIGS, right? And you have this audio track going on now in Indies, right? And I assume you want to look at future trends, right? Things like UGC are hot right now, and there's other things that are really popular in the industry right now. And you're trying to plan out. Maybe you're not getting down to the nitty gritty of panels, like what panels will we be doing here, right? But
Yep.
how do you kind of collaborate with others on kind of what do we want to be doing at these shows next year?
Yeah, so there's kind of two hats. There's the founder hat where I recognize I'm a little bit too important in my company, where if you took me away, there's a lot of things that would no longer work in the company. And I'm always looking at how do I make myself redundant as a founder. And that's a huge challenge for me. And then there's the production hat of what are these events going to be like? How are they going to be different? Why is someone going to spend hundreds of dollars to come to my event? At the end of the day, the conferences we host, they're not cheap. Even though I say they are the cheapest when you look at the industry norms, it's still hundreds of dollars. It's still a fairly serious investment for most people. And a lot of the time, all the time, our conferences are during the weekday, which means people have to take time off work on top of their investment to get a ticket and attend. So, you have to have a very compelling reason to get someone to do that, to commit to oftentimes 2 days off work and going. So, how do we build the event? It all comes down to what do we want to do? MIGS for the last 2 years was business. And so we knew everything we built had to be around how do we make more business happen. And we were navigating at the time the worst round of layoffs in the video game industry, the most pessimistic times of the video game industry, and so everybody was looking for deals, and everybody was looking for a little bit of that security. I need to find a deal for next year, or how am I going to keep my people employed? Um, and so we knew that, okay, well, we need to get people with money investments. We need to get people to think about how is the industry changing. What are the trends? We know AI is impacting the industry. We know UGC's impact. So we try to look at the trends. Another example is our XP Game Summit for the last 2 years. We focus very much on IP in video games, something that's a little bit more timeless, not kind of a hot buzzword, but something that I see in Canada, where Canada is a very kind of external development heavy country. There's not a lot of Canadian studios that own their IP here. Usually, when they're successful, they get acquired by um, a company from outside of Canada. So how do we keep value within Canadian studios for Canadians. And those were the themes we were looking at. After 2 years of doing that, we've seen that the first year was a bit hotter than the second. So now we're thinking, well, okay, in year three, let's go elsewhere. I think we've had enough conversations around IP. What are people looking for more? Or they may be looking more for game development talk. So, not everything always works. Like we always take our best guess. This year at MIGS, we're adding an audio track for the first time in years. MIGS used to have one. It's the first time we as XP Gaming add an audio track to our conference, and it's thanks to our partnership with Audio Kinetic. It's really thanks to them who came to the table and proposed to work together to host their Wise tour at MIGS, and on top of that, build an audio track. Once I get through MIGS, the exit surveys are going to tell us, did people like this? Were the rooms well attended? What was the feedback? Was it valuable? Was it not valuable? And a lot of that dictates what we do next year. If everyone comes out of MIGS and says, oh my goodness, that audio track was amazing, well, guess what? You're going to get an audio track the next year. Likewise, like with some speakers, we had a speaker in Toronto that we brought in from Denmark, who was wonderful speaker and very knowledgeable about IP and games. And his room was bursting at the seams with like people just crowding in there to listen to his talk. And so we brought him the next year, and once again it was crowded. Like we brought him again, and we did a workshop about how to develop your IP in games and at what stage of your game do you work on that. And again, his talk was bursting at the seams. So it's a lot of trial and error to come down to your question of how do we do it. The Atlantic event, which is our newest one that we built this year in Prince Edward Island, that one we really wanted to lean into the East Coast identity, which honestly I didn't know what it was. I had never been to the East Coast of Canada, but we were working with a studio that was the champion of that conference, Iron Fox Games, based in Prince Edward Island in Charlottetown. And they were kind of we were giving them a platform, but they were bringing the identity and the vibes of the region so that it could resonate genuinely with the attendees and give it a special spin. So everywhere we go, like going back to my that identity is the community gets reflected in the conference. And even when you look globally, GDC feels and looks very different than Gamescom, even though both are these massive events where, how can you build an identity with tens of thousands of people there? They do feel different because of where they are located geographically, where they are in the time of the year, what happens at the show. All those things are part of the identity.
Yeah, I love that. There's a few notes I took during this, right? But the last part you just said, it's like every community has a different flavor, every city has a different flavor. How do you infuse that flavor into what you're building to make sure that people resonate with it, right? It'll get them more excited to go out. It's not going to be that perfectly strange experience because I know this studio or I know that. There's other things you said I want to touch on. Is an interesting concept because I love it, right? You mentioned I might say the words wrong, but you said you're kind of too important to be pulled away to do some of these tasks these days. And I think that's a hard thing for people to understand as a founder is that, you know what, I might love being in the weeds and getting my hands dirty, right? It might be the most fun I have during the day, but I also realize that my time is better spent elsewhere. So I'm curious on how, out of 1 to 10, how would you rate your delegation skills?
It's a great question. I wonder what my team would rate me. I like to believe I embrace delegation. I want to give it away, and I want to train people to, um, you know, to take on more roles, to take on more ownership, and to be more independent. Um, so I do feel I embrace that. So if 1 to 10, I'd say I'm probably 8 at delegation. But at the same time, you have to be cautious that not a founder will have 5 roles. You can't just dump those 5 roles on one person. You have to delegate properly and help and support those team members to grow into those roles. And I think the hardest part is letting them make mistakes. It's like watching, I don't know if you have kids, but it's like watching a toddler walking for the first time and holding back catching them when they're going to fall. Like they need to fall, they need to understand what that feels like, um, and learn from that mistake of, if I do this I fall, so let's correct for that. I know that sounds terrible. Hey, my message is let your kids fall, but um, ultimately your teams will make mistakes, and you have to let them make those mistakes, and you have to let them feel the consequences of those mistakes, because failure is the best teacher. And as a founder, we all, like founders here, will all know that the best founders are the ones that fail fast. They don't fear failure, they embrace it, they know it's going to happen, and when it happens, you just like, oh, okay, let's just get through it and fix it, and let's not do that again. um, so there's this tension, I think, when you are delegating, of you want to protect your team, you want to warn them, um, and by all means, if you see a catastrophic mistake, sure, get involved, but also, the only way that you can really step away is letting them make those mistakes, so they know how to own that role, and eventually they'll know how to own it better than you, and at that point you just become a liability. And that's the best feeling as a founder, is when you realize you become a liability to, when you get involved, because that means the process now works more efficiently without you involved, and that's the goal.
Yeah, the house is on fire. Get the house off fire. But I had a podcast the other day with a gentleman, Thad Sasser, and he said, he didn't want his team to fail at first. So anytime they bring him a project, he would help finish it and fix it for them. And then he realized that he's doing it for everyone, and he's creating so much more work for himself. Whereas if he would have just helped them and enabled them to do it themselves, he could have saved him the time. And he said that was the biggest learning experience, is that as a leader, you need to embrace failure, because that's how they're going to grow as a person and his career development. And it's hard, but the toddler example is perfect.
And also, like, creating the safe space for people to fail is also another challenge. Like, at the end of the day, a lot of people work for a paycheck, right? They're employed by a company, and there is this unspoken truth of, if you don't perform, or if you cause too many mistakes, like, it could be your job on the line. So I think it's important to also reinforce that communication, and helping the team understand what is their boundary, their freedom to experiment and to fail. Like, if someone is afraid of failing because they're afraid of their job, you're not going to get as much creativity out of them, or as much risk taking out of them. um, and different companies can weather different risks, so that's where founders and managers can really bring their own touch to it, and dial in and adjust the settings for the optimal amount of risk and comfort level for employees to really thrive in those environments.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're going to stifle or stifle the creativity or the ability to create if you're going to scare people into kind of taking those chances. I never really looked at it from that angle, but that makes a ton of sense.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing you mentioned I really wanted to kind of dig into, just a high level, is exit surveys. We talk about feedback for games. You have Discords, you have all this, and it's important to get that feedback. But when you're running a conference, putting on shows, you have tracks going on, right? You want to understand what sessions hit, what sessions miss. How
Mhm.
have your exit surveys evolved over time, and how is the success rate of them, would you say?
Ooh, that's a very good question. So we have a lot of ways to collect data from our shows. The exit survey is one of them, and I'd say it reflects maybe 10% of our audience. People just don't like writing surveys. I don't fill out my surveys when I go to events. A lot of the times I go to too many, and it's a lot of surveys to fill out.
I
So the
get it.
people who will fill out the survey are either the people who love the event, who love your brand, or you've made a personal connection with, or the opposite. They absolutely had a terrible time and will hate it. So the exit survey will provide oftentimes very polarizing responses. You're going to get either the worst of your negative feedback or the best of your positive feedback. What I feel that, having my events be what I like to call intentional intimacy, as in they're not 30,000 people, they're all under 2,000 people. It allows me to walk the show floor, talk to people, and create genuine connections with people. And I let them know, like, hey, if you like this, some of the resources we have are based on the data we collect. And if you have a good time, if you strike some good deals, let me know, whether it is through the exit survey, or you reach out to me. And I'm starting to get that reputation now, that people, even if they don't do the exit survey, they'll reach out to me by an email, and they say, oh, that event you put on 5 months ago, I met this person and we got a deal going, and it just closed today. And they're excited to share it with me, because we get to share that success. They recognize that, us putting on the conference created this opportunity for them, and now they're successful. And they want to pass that on to others, of making sure the event sticks around, so other people can get those successes. Um, so that's one kind of way we collect data. We have platforms in all of our events. We work with Meet to Match. There's some data on the back end where we can see what sessions people are putting into their calendars, which ones are more popular. We also have started putting in counters in our rooms. So it's literally a person that's there counting people sitting in the room just to understand how full the sessions are. And those are always made at the same point in time. We always count the rooms at about the halfway point to get a real sense, because there's always sometimes a spike at the beginning or at the end of a talk. Um, and we collect all of that, and based on all of that feedback, and not just the attendees, we also talk to our sponsors and our partners and our exhibitors. Sometimes it works great for some people, sometimes it doesn't, and that's a conversation of, is the problem the show, is it the mismatch of a demographic and who you're looking for, is it the way you're activating at the show that's not working? So there's a lot. I wish I had more data, of course. As an engineer, I always want more data, but we're getting better every time, and the more we build those genuine relationships with people, the more they're willing to open up to us and share their success stories.
I'm with you on the data side of things, but I'm also completely with you on filling out surveys, right? And we often don't eat our own dog food when we're trying to get people to do this stuff. And I'm always trying to think, what's a better way to try and get this content from people? Is it maybe just a QR code, or, the airport has those little smiley faces or frowny buttons when you're like
Oh
leaving the
yeah, that's a good
bathroom or
one.
something like that. And just, it's just so hard, to your point. Like, if you're going to leave a comment, you're going to be either polarized one way or the other for the most part, right? And it's just funny to think about how do you break this down. But to your point, again, if someone comes to you, I closed a deal, or you hit great numbers in attendance, or saw a lot of posts about something, you're like, all right, we did something right, and that's a win, right? And that's what you got to look for.
Yeah, and sometimes our collection systems aren't set up to get the feedback. Like a great example, after my first conference in Toronto, like 6 months later, there was a person that I knew of them, but we didn't really have much of a relationship. And I saw on LinkedIn they shared a story of how they were laid off. They had, their savings were running thin. They were expecting their first child. They were stressed out of their mind, and they saw our conference in Toronto, which at the time had no reputation. It was a fairly new one, but they decided to invest, the hundreds of dollars to attend the conference, and through that got a job because they they organically networked with someone, got a job, and it secured their life. And as far as I know, 2 years later, 2 or 3 years later, they are still there and thriving. And I think back to how stressed I was organizing that event, and how a lot of things didn't happen the way I wanted to. And financially it was probably not great. um, but I think back to stories like that, I'm like, if I hadn't done that, where would this guy be? Or that event literally changed his life. Of course, he betted on himself by attending. But those life changing stories are just touching. Like I need to get a bunch of screenshots, and I just got to build like the wall of wins, is what I want to call it, just to remind myself that, like, these things impact people, and it's easy to forget that.
Yeah, it says something about you as a leader, where you're enabling others to take that next step, and you're trying to proactively put them in the right position, and just the pure excitement when it happens, right? Like, when you can make, as the connector, that connection happen, that's just like that light bulb moment where it makes your heart sink, because you're, or in a good way, right? You're just like happy that you made that connection, and the power. It's one of those things that, like, this person will remember this moment. Like, this is great, and this is perfect, and that's more powerful to what you said in the beginning. You don't do this for the money. Yeah, obviously you want to get paid, but like, it's things like
Mhm.
this that, like, that connection's made. If you ever need something, God forbid, right, you need to reach out to this person, right? They'll be there for you. And I think that's the most amazing part of networking and building this community that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and another thing you reminded me, we focused a lot on the sponsors and the attendees and all that. But these events, whether we organize them or whether they're your local events about, getting 10, 20 devs in your community together every Thursday of the month or something, creating a platform for people to present our speakers. I don't talk enough about those. Um, there are so many knowledgeable people out there, and I get asked a lot, how do I get into your programming? Because especially in North America, the opportunities to speak on stage are relatively limited, or they were even more so limited 5 years ago. And a lot of people, well, first there's a group that's looking for those opportunities, and oftentimes if you're not connected or you're not in the know, it's kind of hard to, like, how do I submit my talk about this thing I did that nobody knows about? And then the other aspect is we're a relatively pretty introverted community in game development. And so given like a lot of the times people are not going to be excited to say, yeah, yeah, put me on stage. But if they can get a community of like, oh, you really know this, you should share it with people, and giving them that comfort and that safety to like, yeah, get on, like you know your stuff, get on stage and talk about it with a like-minded community that can resonate with you and that can maybe even give you feedback. That's been another very empowering tool of having a platform to give voices, how do you say, to give people a voice that maybe otherwise wouldn't. um, and it's a double-edged sword because there's only so many slots, so of course there's a lot of people that I cannot put in our programming. And so for as much as we are empowering a set number of voices every year, we are also having to pass on a lot more voices, unfortunately. um, but that goes back to that importance of community. We can't do all the events out there. Not all events need to be 30,000 people or even 1,000 people. Events that are 15, 20 people are just as important, and can create that sense of community as well.
Yeah, we're trying to find out who is the most extroverted introvert of all of us, right? I think everyone in this industry is introverted, and it's hard for people to go out and speak. I'm one of those people, right? And people are always like, "Oh, but you host a podcast." Well, it's really easy to talk to someone from across the screen, right? But once you're in a room with someone, unless you, for me personally, I need liquid courage, and then I'm good to go. But like, it's hard to break the ice. And once the ice is broken, luckily all you talk about is mostly gaming. That's the beauty of the industry, right? We just talk about gaming, but it's always still that first move. Like, I think we all live with imposter syndrome in some degree, right? It's how do
Oh,
you
yeah.
get over that hump of saying, all right, I know what I'm talking about, right? It's a weird place to be, but at some point you realize that you're good at what you do. You can start to talk about it.
Yeah. And we had the most funny accidental networking event happen at MIGS. I think it was last year or the year before. We had an after party, a happy hour, like an after party for the event, and we set up this room, and there was a jazz band playing video game music, and there was a bar, and people could drink and socialize. And we had set up Smash Brothers off to the side with some couches. It was almost like a side activation, and some people started gravitating towards that. And they picked up a controller and they were playing, and strangers were coming in and they weren't really talking, but they were laughing and having a good time and bonding over the video game. Fast forward 4 hours, that was the hottest spot where there was just crowds around, and there was this one player that nobody could defeat in Smash Brothers. And funny enough, he also worked at Nintendo. And everybody was taking turns trying to defeat him. And as people were getting closer, like everybody was cheering, everyone was on the edge of their seat. And it just reminded me, like, I grew up in the 90s. It reminded me of that couch co-op day of like uh, trying to fight a hard boss and I can't do it. And then like you try, and it's passing the controller back and forth. And that common memory for everybody and bonding, like I've now dubbed that the introvert lounge. And now I try to design and build one in all my events because I recognize that is a way of connecting. That is probably the most organic way gamers connect. And I just hadn't realized it until I saw it.
And the best part is, from a business perspective, that's where business gets done. You make these relationships in these casual places, with, like hanging out, talking games. Like you build this friendship, this relationship, and maybe you're not trying to sell something today or tomorrow, but we have this relationship now that's beyond just us talking.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, business people do business with people they like. Like if you don't like someone, you would have to have a very good product for to support that business. But if you really like a business, you'll try to go out of your way to see how can I support this person? How can I find a way to work with them?
So I got two more questions here, I think, for you,
Yep.
and we'll see where we go. I'm curious, do you get to other conferences? Do you do some competitive analysis and get to go around and say, hey, I love what they're doing here or there?
Oh, absolutely. I try to attend 3 conferences minimum per year, and I always try to make new ones. So I usually kind of get tired out of a conference after 2 years. So I go once to kind of scope it out, research it, get inspired, collect new ideas, and then I go back the second year, oftentimes with a more strategic approach of okay, how am I going to network? How am I going to do business at this event? And then by the third year, it's let's pick a new region, a new event. Um, and that's so short answer, yes. And that's where I get a lot of my inspiration, because if you're always going to the same events, That's not how you're going to get new ideas. And I think there's over like 300 game conferences around the world, and all of them have unique vibes. And when you talk to people, like I always talk to people before scouting, which event should I go for? Which one? What's this one like? What should I expect from this one? And they're all very different. You know, they have a very similar core. You're going to network. There's talks. There's sometimes exhibitors, but they all feel and look different. And some are very creative. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a great idea how they did that. And then I bring it and I add my own creative spin to it and I put it into my events. So it's a very important part to travel the world and attend other events. I didn't see that when I started. I remember my first international event was Nordic Games in Sweden, and I was like, oh, I'm so busy, I have so much money, can I really afford like to make a trip to Europe to see this? And it was my first time to Europe, and it was just so eye-opening, and I made connections there that I never would have thought. Like I didn't even have a real, I did have a goal, but I met people so serendipitously, and some of them are actually like really good friends of mine today. And I met them in the most random way. Like one person I met, I was waiting for a meeting at a table, and I was standing waiting for the table to clear. And there was another gentleman who was waiting there for some reason, and there was a confusion around the table. But while we were waiting there, we spoke for 5 minutes. I learned what he did, and I thought it was really interesting. I grabbed his business card, and we didn't really talk until 2 years later when I thought of him for something, and we've reconnected. We've worked together now. We have a very genuine, friendship. And then there's just someone else that I just met there, and like he was very genuine off the bat, and I brought him to Canada not like the year after, and we're very good friends to this day, just like sharing notes, visiting each other when we have the chance. So yeah, you just never know what's going to happen. But putting yourself out there is never a bad idea.
That's what I really love about the industry is you can make some best friends at some of these events. And it's funny to talk to some of my friends that go to conferences in other industries, and they're like, "No, there's not that many after parties at our events." I'm just like, "Really? Like, there has to be somewhere. Maybe they're just not. Maybe they're just introverted like me, and they don't go out to other parties." But I'm just like, "There's got to be something." But the more I see it in gaming, it's everywhere. It's just that it's that vibe, for better or for worse.
Yeah, every industry kind of creates its own identity and how to operate. And that's kind of the beauty of the video game industry. Not only is the products we work on fun, but so are the people who work behind the scenes.
So you really got this really cool job, right? You get to go look at conferences, you're building conferences, you're doing all this networking stuff. My question is, what do you dislike about your day? Well, what's the one thing you need to do that just kind of sucks?
Oh boy. Where to start? Let me pull out my laundry list. What sucks the most in this type of business? I think it's really the high risk nature of it. Like conferences are expensive. I've worked on some that are I think the cheapest I've been able to make them are, in the just shy of 100,000, and I've worked on some that are $1 million. And putting up that risk and then trying to bring everybody together and bringing the support together, and it's almost like every year having to re-justify your existence. I think that grind gets tiring. I would love to just be able to say, I've built it, they will come. And um and just like have rebookings and all that. And I've had people from other industries say, why don't you book partners over like 3 years or something like that? I'm like, the game industry doesn't work like that. It changes and morphs so much. Nobody wants to commit for 3 years, but there are some industries that have I know some event organizers that they're able to book their venues 10 years in advance. Like they have 10 years planned with their dates and everything, and they have partners involved. I've maybe it's because of my size, maybe like the larger events are capable of doing this in the gaming industry. I have personally not seen it where we can build that level of resilience of knowing, okay, the next 3 years we're secure. It's always kind of almost like an existential crisis. And there's a lot of ways to navigate that, but yeah, that's probably the thing I hate the most. And that's a pretty big one. Actually, I like to compare it a lot to, since audiences game developers, I like to compare it a lot to a video game. Building an event is not that different from a video game in some ways, where a video game you will spend 2 to 3 years developing, investing money, investing resources, all for one launch day, one moment to capture the attention and to make back all your money. and something could happen. There could be a AAA game that launches just before your game, or you launch in the worst window possible, or there's an economic crisis that you didn't foresee 3 years ago. Like all of these patterns, and that could happen to us too, where anything could happen in the world that shuts us down, a weather event, a global pandemic, things like that. So that's the worst by far. But if we're talking a little bit more mundane of like what do I dislike in the day to day, it's probably drafting contracts. Um, and my team hounds me for, they're like, did you write the contract? Like, no, like they're committed, and but doing the paperwork, and that's monotonous and
Not
boring.
your jam.
Yeah, it's just not very rewarding. it's
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 funny,
important but boring.
you compare it to a video game, and it's funny again. It comes down to modeling. I think at the end of the day, right? You build all this stuff for this one moment, right? Whether it be a launch, whether it's always a launch of something, right? Like comes
Mhm.
down to understand how the market dynamics is going to work. Maybe to your hockey stick analogy earlier, right? With you, it's going to come in the last 2 weeks. With the game, maybe you start slower with wish lists, and it's a little different of a shape. But it all comes down to this one moment of launching, and how do you prep for that? I think
And then your
super
your
cool.
your trend, maybe you started your game 5 years ago and you bet on battle royales because they were hot. Now here we are 5 years later, and it's like, whoops, battle royale fatigue has happened, and your game is less appealing all of a sudden, or there's
No, that
now
can't
too
happen, can
many
it?
competitors.
Well, Jason, I can't thank you enough. I know you have a busy bunch of weeks coming up, so I appreciate you taking an hour here and let sharing your story and what you're building up. Before we do end today's episode, is there anything you want to share, or let us know where we could find you, or MIGS, or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested in checking out any of the events we're planning, they're always listed in full on xpgaming.biz. It's our website. I will say it's a little outdated, but all the events are always updated on what we're working on there. And especially if you're on the East Coast, come check out MIGS, the Montreal International Game Summit. It is the second largest game conference in North America, second only to GDC. And it's going to be a good one. We're seeing a lot of international presence, a lot of great talks, and a lot of business being made there.
Awesome. We'll have all the links that Jason mentioned on our player driven blog. Again, thank you, Jason. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend and best of luck with everything.